I would highlight something that those who are listening, I want you to be aware of. As you listen to those of the Republican Party, those that believe these conservative values of love of God, country, family, that as we talk about our history, as we talk about things we're doing and have overcome and achieved, notice the sense of hope that we bring to the message. Notice the sense of unity. Yes, we look back on the past, because we have a lot to learn from the past. But we look at the past in a way of what we have achieved and how far we've come, not where we are today. And I want Americans to think through the last couple years. Are we tired of being afraid? Are we tired of being angry? Are we tired of fear? Listen to the messages of our great history, and you'll see that this country is a country of second chances. This country is a place where you come here, no matter what language you speak, how poor you are, you have the opportunity to live your American dream. It was the Marxists, and I'm going to think of his name in a second, who said very simply, the first battleground, Karl Marx, the first battleground is rewriting of history. Why would the Marxists, why would the hard left want to steal our history, change our history? Because within our great American history, we have pride in our past, appreciation for our present, and a vision for our future. We are American people within our DNA that we are hopeful. And only through the nuances of changing history, which is, by the way, has been done since the 1940s by the progressive father of public school system, John Dewey, that this change has been happening. We talk about the success of Tulsa, remarkable success. Just a few decades after the Civil War ended, you have this environment of success where people could live their American dream. A little town where 600 businesses were established, over 50 millionaires. 6 of them had their own private planes. Started back in the early 1900s. Well, by 1921, that little community was destroyed within 12 hours. Not by the American people, but by Southern Democratic KKK members. That's the nuance. We've been fighting against evil for a long time. We will continue to. But let's just make sure that we, the American people, know who the fight is against. It's not against those of us who believe in God, country, family, our free market, the belief of looking at each other inside out versus outside in. We are friends, no matter what side of the aisle we sit on. Those of us who believe in our American way, those of us who see our future as coming closer together, not dividing us. We are on the same team of friends. Let's remember that. I'm going to read an introductory that I have from one of the books I wrote earlier. For those who grew up in the Deep South, in the days of KKK and Jim Crow segregation, pride in the community was not founded on an embellishment of opportunities lost due to racism. Instead, it was built on the highlighting of the great accomplishments achieved in spite of the obstacles. The can-do outlook that prevailed in the past generations cleared the pathway to prosperity and celebrated a creative, courageous, and self-respecting community determined not to be held back. That community succeeded in their quest. That community was my dad's generation and the ones before that who believed in this great country, who went to war to fight for this great country. I'm going to talk about a couple of my heroes. I've had a chance, thank goodness, growing up in the Deep South, days of KKK, Jim Crow, and segregation, Tallahassee, Florida, to be raised by a community that was proud of who they were, a community whose parents and teachers collaborated, talked, respected each other, because the goal at the end of the day was their children would go out and give their community a good name, give their family a good name, and represent the race that could achieve anything and overcome any obstacles. My hero was not an NFL player. a basketball player or some person on TV who had no idea who they were, what their character was. My hero was someone who I saw his mistakes that he made. He was not a perfect person, but boy, was he a great father. And that's my dad, Clarence Burgess Owens, Sr. Dad represented that generation very, very well. By the way, for those who don't know, which I'm sure you don't, most don't because of the history has been changed, my race has never been a race of hopeless, hapless people waiting for white people to show up and give us freedom. We got freedom through the fight in which we participated in the Civil War. And there was no race that appreciated that freedom more than my race. And for generations from that point on, we've had within our DNA a desire for freedom, the conservative values of home, family, free market, faith. And I grew up in a home that taught that. It was a good experience of that. My dad was raised by parents who did not finish high school. Well, my grandmother did finish high school when she was 50 years old. My grandfather, dropped out when he was in third grade. Business owners. But let me tell you how it works out in America. Because every generation looks to help the next generation stand on their shoulders. In my community, that was the goal. In my family, that's exactly what happened. Because those humble beginnings, those parents of 4 children that did not have an education, formal education, the next generation were kids that had nothing but good education. My dad got his PhD in Ohio State in agronomy, and an uncle got his PhD in economics at Ohio State, 1950-51, days of KKK, Jim Crow, and segregation. Had an uncle, engineer. And it was part-time. He decided he wanted to fly planes. In the early 1960s, this was something that no one ever did, and that is he purchased his own private plane, single prop. He would take mail from Wichita Falls, Texas base to Chicago. Who did that in 1960-61? Well, as a 12-year-old, I had a chance to experience and understand the opportunity to dream past my limitations, or what perceived limitations. Because one time he flew out to Tallahassee, where I had a chance to fly the first time in this private plane, and I learned something through that process, because that's what that generation did. They wanted to make sure that every generation was getting more educated, more critical thinking skills. As we went up, for those who don't understand what a stall is, it's important to know what a stall is before you stall. And he took us up, it took me and myself up and stalled the airplane. And he saw that I was panicking. He grabbed control and explained airplane lift. And to this day, I can explain exactly to you what airplane lift looks like and how it feels. That was that generation that overcame. Now, my dad grew up in Texas, went to war. He's in the Philippines, and this is in Japan, where he finished up. This is, again, received some documentation, because he ended up coming back from from war to Texas. And in those days in Texas, because of Jim Crow laws, they could not get their postgraduate degrees. I ran across a box of letters after Dad passed away, something he never talked about. This box of rejection letters. Colleges across our country, particularly Northeast, that had rejected his application to get his postgraduate degree. And I knew it was because of race. I can see it in the application and the amount of letters I saw in that particular box. And what's interesting about that generation, about Dad, he never complained about it, he never pulled it out, he never said, well, this is what they did to me. That was a generation that took rejection, took obstacles as motivation. That was a generation that said, if you don't believe me, sit back, you watch. I'm going to run harder, study harder, work harder, and I will prove, I will command your respect, because I do believe in meritocracy, which we did. Well, he continued that process and ended up getting to Ohio State. 5 years after graduating from Ohio State with his PhD, we were living in Liberia, Africa. He was doing research there. Dad went on to teach for 40 years at Florida A&M campus. He was a researcher. He was a farmer for 35 of those years. He was a remarkable mentor, and he believed that our race, if given an opportunity of education, could achieve and move forward. Because he understood his past, because he was taught at that time the greatness of people like Booker T. Washington and the many people I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes, he appreciated the process that he had made and his family had made at that point, and he saw such a great future for those that was coming behind him. So we have a granddad who, third grade dropout, a dad who was a college professor, and his son who now stands before you in Congress. This country is nothing like it. It's time for us to understand, if you want a second chance, if you want to dream big, if you want to overcome, this is the place. And guess what? You'll have help from every quarter of this United States, every culture, every religion, every color. It does not matter, because in this country, we teach ourselves to look at each other from inside out, not outside in. I refuse, as long as I stand in Congress, to allow the left to demean my race's past. I refuse to allow the left to narrate that my race was one that was hopeless, hapless, could not achieve, and sit back and look at nothing but the negative that happened. And by the way, negative happens to every race, every culture, every person. Is life. It's what you do with it that makes us Americans. Americans never give up on our dream. We believe in something called meritocracy, and we do not believe we should give this power over to any government power to live our lives and move forward. If you think about the person who would appreciate more than anyone else in this room a full glass of water, that person would be the one who's not had a drop in days. That first drop would be like heaven. That was the black community when freedom was given to us. A race that for generations never thought freedom was a possibility. A generation, a race that sent their sons to war, that volunteered because they understood the power of freedom. They understood the power of having their faith that they can worship without someone beating them up or hanging them. One that believed in family, because there was no guarantee in those days that their family would ever stay united. That believed in an idea called ownership of property, free market, to be creative, to get paid for your own work, your own effort, and your own risk. In the benefit of education, there was no race in our country that understood and believed and appreciated this more than mine did. There's a reason why through the 40s, 50s, and 60s, it was a black community that led our country in the growth of the middle class. Men matriculated from college, men committed to marriage, percentage of entrepreneurs. There's a reason why growing up in Tallahassee, I could look around that community, not seeing a black American, not associating with white Americans until I was 16 years old, and seeing nothing but business ownership everywhere. Whether it be Baker's Pharmacy, Perkins Service Station, Speed Grocery Store, FAMU Hospital with black nurses and black doctors, engineers, lawyers, teachers. And the message was very similar. You live in America, young man. You can achieve anything you want to if you commit to those tenets that make our country great: faith, family, the free market, and education. We've had our representation of brave warriors throughout our history, as we do today, that serve, the frontline warriors, that serve in the services, that get out every single day, that thin blue line to protect us from evil. Why is their contribution so important? They believed in something very simply, and this is something from Booker T. Washington. You do not have to beg or ask for respect when you can command respect. You do not have to beg or demand somebody else's property in a free country when you can earn it yourself. How do we do that? Through meritocracy. How do we do that? By showing courage when others might feel fear. Ask the all-black Army in the 54th Army Regiment of Massachusetts. This is during the Civil War. Free men who volunteered to go south to fight a battle to free their fellow members of their race. Or the 1869 Buffalo Soldiers, or the World War II unit that went to Germany called the Black Rattlers, or by the Germans called the Hellfighters, because they had so much respect for the way they fought and what they did. My race has stood on the shoulders of great men and women I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes. One of the greatest that I realized after my dad had passed and after I did my homework that an entire generation listened to and built their lives around. It's called Booker T. Washington, former slave, who started Tuskegee University in 1881, and by 1905 was creating more self-made millionaires than Harvard, Yale, and Princeton combined. Why? Because he was teaching those young people coming through to master not just one trade, but two. Yes, to work harder than the next guy. Yes, don't complain about the work. Don't complain about what's asked of you. Don't do what's happening in teaching our kids today, where our kids say, well, I have to work harder than the other guy because of my color. No, you have to work harder than the other guy because that's what America's about. You outrun, you outwork, you outstudy. You find your greatest potential by what you put into your efforts. And you don't lower your standards because somebody else has lowered theirs. We don't do that. That's not America. Black History Month is dedicated to the heroes who rose above slavery, segregation, and racism to champion life, liberty, pursuit of happiness for future generations. Because of their courage, Black Americans have made enormous strides to shape the soul of our nation. From a childhood in segregated South to serving in Congress, I'm inspired by the tenacity of giants like Charles R. Drew, Robert Smalls, J. Mayo Williams, Bessie Coleman, Dr. Mildred Jefferson, and Elizabeth Freeman, Sergeant William Carney, and so many others who fought for the founding ideals of liberty and equality. I'd like to share a few of my heroes with you that have had a tremendous impact on my life and the lives of countless Americans. These, by the way, are Americans who are proud to be Americans. These are Americans proud of their race. These are Americans who saw their kids living a much better dream, and the last thing they would do is tell them to stop dreaming. The last thing they would do is tell them the obstacle's too great for them. The last thing they would do is say these white people are going to keep you from achieving your dreams. No, we were taught, it didn't matter who it was or what it was, that we had within us the ability to overcome all obstacles. Dr. Charles R. Drew was born in 1904 here in D.C., breaking the barriers throughout his life of racially divided America to become the most influential scientist of the 20th century. He was doing his research into banked blood at Columbia University that his ultimate destiny in serving mankind was shaped. As World War II created an important need for procedures to preserve blood and injuries seen by physicians became more severe, the need for blood plasma intensified. As he was the leading authority in the field, Dr. Charles Drew was selected as a full-time medical director of the Blood Forbidden Project, where he supervised the successful collection of thousands of pints of vital plasma for the British, saving countless lives. In February 1941, Drew was appointed the director of the first American Red Cross blood bank and was put in charge of blood for the use of the U.S. Army and Navy. Dr. Drew returned to Freeman's Hospital and Howard University, where he served as a surgeon and professor of medicine from 1942 until he passed away in 1950. Robert Smalls was born into slavery in Beaumont, South Carolina, and gained his freedom daringly and courageously. He commandeered a Confederate cargo ship and sailed the vessel to Union waters before capture, freeing himself, his crew, and his family. His action that day helped persuade Lincoln to accept black soldiers in the Union Army. He went on to serve in the Union Navy and was eventually elected to Congress. Elijah Abels was one of the first early leaders in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a popular missionary who, as a black man, lived the restored gospel that was intended for black and white, bond and free. Born in Texas in 1892, Bessie Coleman, also known as Queen Bess or Brave Bessie, was the first black female pilot. Her mother, Susan, was a maid. Her father, George, was a sharecropper of mixed Native American and African American descent. Bessie grew up helping her mother pick cotton and wash laundry to earn extra money. By the time she was 18, she saved enough money to attend the Colored Agriculture and Normal University, now Langston University, in Langston, Oklahoma. She dropped out of college after only one semester because she could not afford to attend. Bessie's brothers both served in the military in World War I, came home with stories of their time in France, often teasing her that French women could learn how to fly airplanes, but Bessie couldn't. Because of this, she applied to many flight schools across the country, but no school would take her because she was a black woman. With no opportunity in America, Bessie saved and finally obtained scholarships to travel to France to a flight school. She even had to take a French class at night to complete her flight school application. After finishing flight school, she toured the country, giving speeches, showing videos of her air tricks to earn money, refusing to speak anywhere that was segregated or discriminated against black Americans. In 1922, I want you to keep in mind these dates. These are the dates the other side of the aisle would like to tell you that we were hopeless, hapless, and doing nothing. No, we were doing just like every other race in this country has, every other culture that's overcome obstacles. We had great vision, and we had great courage, and we succeeded big time. She became more popular both in the United States and Europe. She toured the country giving flight lessons, performing in-flight shows. She encouraged women to learn how to fly, becoming famous in America and Europe as a star pilot. On April 30th, 1926, Bessie passed away in a tragic plane crash. She remains an inspiration to untold millions around the world. Madam C.J. Walker was born in 1867 in Delta, Louisiana plantation, where her parents had been enslaved before the end of the Civil War. She and her sister grew cotton in Delta and Vicksburg, Mississippi, and survived by working in the fields. To escape the abuse from her brother-in-law, she married Moses McWilliams at the age of 14. Following the death of her husband, she moved to St. Louis to join her 4 brothers who had become barbers. With just $1.50 a day, she managed to save enough money to send her daughter to public school. As a talented entrepreneur with a skill for self-promotion, she often said, "I got my start by giving myself a start." How about that one? I got my start by giving myself a start. She was the first self-made woman millionaire in America, earning her fortune through Business Empire, a line of hair care products, especially for black women, she created after experimenting hair loss. The self-made millionaire used her fortune to fund scholarships for women and donated large parts of her wealth to charity. Elizabeth Freeman, better known as Mom Bet, was born into slavery, but became the first slave to be freed under the Massachusetts Constitution. Less than 1 year after the adoption of the Massachusetts State Constitution, she filed a lawsuit for freedom, marking the beginning of a group of freedom suits that would ultimately lead to Massachusetts Supreme Court Judicial Court to outlaw slavery in their state. Despite not knowing how to read and write, she was clever enough, strategic enough, determined enough to secure her freedom. She sought out the help of a local lawyer after being inspired by the constitutional provision that all men were created free and equal. They won the case, ending slavery in the state of Massachusetts. And after securing her freedom, she became a paid domestic worker and also making a living as a prominent leader and a midwife and nurse. After 20 years, she was able to buy her own house where she lived with her children. She passed away December 28th, 1829, at the age of 85. It's amazing, these remarkable men and women who figured out the American dream could work for them if they never gave up on it. J. Mayo Williams was one of the first black professional football players in the 1920s and went on to become one of the most successful record producers in the 1930s and 40s. He was the only man to be inducted in both the National Football Hall of Fame and the Blues Hall of Fame. Senator Hiram Reeves of Mississippi in 1870 became the first African American to serve in the U.S. Senate. As a member of the Republican Party, he challenged the social order and was an outspoken opponent against segregation, fighting for equality across racial lines. Sergeant William Carney was the first black Medal of Honor recipient. He kept the American flag held high. He was born in Norfolk, Virginia in 1840 to a family of enslaved people. His parents bought their freedom and moved to Massachusetts. He enlisted in March of 1863, and his unit, the 54th, which included two sons of abolitionist Frederick Douglass, headed down to South Carolina. By the way, the South Carolina Confederate president had made note that any black soldier caught would be instantly hung. This is what these men knew and understood, and yet they marched south to fight for the freedom of their race and their country. Douglass headed down to South Carolina. Their first combat mission was leading the charge on Fort Wagner in Charleston. Carney saw his unit's flag bearer was shot and killed and ran to catch the American flag he was holding. Carney, too, was shot during the battle, but he held that flag high, crawled up the hill toward the fort. He planted a flag in the sand and kept holding on even after he was rescued. He was the first to receive the Medal of Honor. Let me tell you how acts like that of courage and knowing our history adds up. As a seventh grader, I had an opportunity. I was chosen in my segregated high school, junior high school, to raise the flag in the morning, to let it and to bring it down in the afternoon. An honor. I remember walking to school every morning, early in the morning, and my friend Spencer Williams and I, we understood the nature of that flag, what it meant. We knew our parents, my dad had come back from war and what he felt about it. And we were sure never to let that flag touch the ground. That reverence to our flag allowed me to feel proud as an NFL player, to hear the national anthem, to see that flag flying on the sideline, getting teary-eyed. So I was living my dream, in a country that allowed for the American dream to be alive and well. To see how far we've come in the 70s from my upbringing in the 60s. To see my teammates of all colors, background, and creeds, that we could care less about our background, color, or creeds. We cared about the fact that we wanted to win. And we looked inside for those who had the character, the tenacity, the discipline, the courage to play hard so we could win. That is America. That's what we do. Dr. Mildred Jefferson was the first black woman to graduate from Harvard. She dedicated her life to protecting life at all stages. In 1951, Mildred became the first black woman to graduate from Harvard Medical School. By the way, she was a pro-life advocate, just like my parents' generation was across the board. We believe in our children, believe in their history and their future, and they believe they are a gift from God. And my race would not stand for what's happening today as we watch my race being targeted for abortion. She also was the first woman employed as a general surgeon at the Boston University Medical Center. Phyllis Wheatley was born in West Africa and sold to slavery at the age of 7. Despite being enslaved, she learned to read and write. Her Massachusetts owners saw talent in her poetry skills and encouraged her. Phyllis was brought by her owners to London seeking to publish her work. She quickly rose to prominence when she published her books, poems on various subjects, religion, and morals. She became a talented poet. Her poems became popular, even drew the praise of George Washington and poet Jupiter Hammond. As I close this out, I can't say enough how proud I am to have been raised on the time I was raised, in the community I was raised in the race I was raised in a country that gave us all hope for a great future. 12 years old, I had an opportunity because we lived so close to Florida A&M and had all these college kids who were getting engaged with civil rights. And at the age of 12, I decided to join them for a demonstration in front of Florida State Theater. I was the youngest, but I witnessed what it was for young men and women to be disciplined, to be articulate, to be dressed well, to represent our race. Because it wasn't just in front of Florida State Theater that we were making an impact on. It was those watching across our country. I want those who ever watch Martin Luther King demonstrations again to notice something about that remarkable group of people. Notice the white shirts, the dark ties, the dress shoes. Notice the articulation of those who represented these great warriors, these leaders in freedom. Notice the discipline as they were attacked by dogs, fire hoses, people calling them names. Notice they did not retaliate. They did not go down and burn down buildings. They believed in American people. They believed in this country, that they could command respect from around our country by being the best examples of what it was to be an American. They were Christians. It was Martin Luther King's view that by fighting in the way Christians could fight, nonviolently, they can earn the hearts of Americans across our country, and that's exactly what they did. See, what Martin Luther King was doing in that nation at that time was not just fighting against the Jim Crow laws that we talk about all the time, the evil that we saw in the South, perpetrated on American people, on black Americans by Democrats, by the way, at that time. It was more than just Jim Crow that we were fighting against. It was a narrative that black Americans couldn't think. We weren't leaders. We weren't intelligent. We were unkempt. We were undisciplined. We were cowards. That was the narrative that we fought against. That was a narrative that I faced when I left Tallahassee, Florida, with the goal of being a biology major, marine biology, and having someone tell me, or through the grapevine, hearing from someone, a white person who had gone to Florida State, that I couldn't do it, because blacks could not think in those days. That was the thought. Well, unlike today, I didn't take it and say, I'm going to give up, I'm going to quit, I'm going to sue. I was taught, when somebody tells you can't, you prove them wrong. I spent the next 4 years at the University of Miami living in a library when I wasn't playing football. I wanted to prove that guy wrong. That was the generation that I was raised by. Thank goodness. That guy never knew, probably, that I succeeded, but I knew. My parents knew. And now I can tell you the story that that's the way our country, our race was. We have to fight this soft bigotry of low expectations, my friends. It's the worst of all evils. For people to wrap their arms around us, tell how much they love us, and then tell us we can't. To wake up to news reports that we have an administration that for the sake of equity is going to give black people access to crack pots. That's equity. We now have the opportunity to get free crack pipes. Equity is not lowering the standards. Equity, equality, is raising standards so high and telling every single child that can hear your voice that you can do it. That's equality. That's meritocracy. That's how we get respect. We don't command or beg for respect. We command respect. In closing, I often say that Black American history is so rich because of heroes who came before us. These proud Black Americans broke countless barriers and have been lifelong inspirations for untold millions right here in America, but also around the world. Black History Month is an important celebration and a recognition of American history. I am humbled to stand on the shoulders of the great men and women who came before me. I encourage all of you to read the true history of our nation. The true history of our nation is that we, the people, have done it. We, the people, with our good hearts, established the Underground Railroad. I encourage to read. I would not be here without their courage, their sacrifice, their vision. I'm so thankful to have been taught to love our great nation, to love the people before us, that's with us, and those in the future that we'll fight for. Thank you so much. Now yield back.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 4th, 2021, the Chair recognizes